Hello everyone, Toon World here. Hopefully you're all doing well today whenever it is you're watching this video. You all know the drill, the ban list drop for September 2022 just this Monday. And so with it, we got Halqifibrax banned, also Chaos Ruler banned. So you might be thinking, what's Punk going to do now? And that's what I'm going to address in today's video. I've come up with a Pure Punk deck list I'm going to be using throughout this current format. I do want to note that my current list is very preliminary in that I haven't done too much testing quite yet, but I have done some testing at the very least. So I'm at least confident enough to give you what I have here as sort of a baseline for Pure Punk builds going forward. Per usual, just remember that I'm not the best duelist in the world. You don't have to follow what I put out because my list might be missing something that you like, and or maybe there's a tech in the format that it should be playing that I'm not playing for whatever reason it be. So build a deck how you want at the end of the day. You don't take everything I say with a grain of salt. Otherwise, just to get through things, this video is going to be divided per usual into a main deck portion, a spell and trap portion, and an extra deck portion. There will be no side deck portion, mainly because I have not figured out what I want to side exactly for this format. Nonetheless, I will put at the very end, during my usual concluding section, some of the side deck choices that I think I might be putting in for events I go to. So thank you. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll get on with things. So to start with the main deck monsters, I'm going to go through the Punk names, and then we'll get to the hand traps, excluding Imperm, which I am in fact playing. So we're playing one copy of Sherkusai, one copy of Madam Spider, 3 copies of Wagon, 3 copies of Xiamin, 3 copies of Deer Note, 3 copies of Ogre Dance, and finally 3 copies of Foxy Tune. Now, to explain these ratios, the 3 Xiamin, 3 Ogre Dance, 3 Foxy Tune should be self-explanatory to most of you. Even for newcomers, you might be able to imagine that a card that searches your entire deck, a card that searches most of your deck, and then a card that can tutor out any name, bar the level 8s, is pretty important to have at max copies. So I will not play any less than 3 of these. To explain the other ratios, this is going back to what the ban list did. Essentially, without Halqifibrax and Chaos Ruler, I do believe that Pure Punk at the very least, I don't know about Punk variants, but Pure Punk is definitely, to me, going to become a field spell control deck. Essentially, trying to abuse our custom card field spell to draw as many cards as possible. Those cards being either hand traps or extenders to make stronger boards so that you can stomp out your opponent. So it's sort of like an advantage gain deck as opposed to what it was before, where you'd be putting out a ton of negates on top of drawing cards to sort of balance that fine line between control and like a combo heavy negate board. That's why we're playing 3 Wagon. I'm trying to maximize our chances to see the field spell. I know you might be wondering, why not just play 3 Sherkusai also so that you can get to the Wagon if need be. I'm currently testing Sherkusai at 1, mainly because I'm not too big a fan of Rising Carp. Plus, there are some neat lines you can make with Wagon if you go into Almirage. We do have Almirage in the extra deck, so for now, 3 Wagon, 1 Sherkusai. The 3 Deer Note, essentially, I like being able to open this card, mainly because sometimes you won't always be able to use the Foxy Tune to get to the Deer Note. So opening the Deer Note makes things easier. Also, on top of that, in the cases your Foxy Tune ever gets stopped and you hard draw the Deer Note, you can always summon the Deer Note off of its own effect and or summon it off the field spell. And I think that's very important because Deer Note is your main combo piece. Without it, you know, you only have these level 3 names. You can't really make the Dragon Drive and get those extra bodies through Deer Note's effect. So making sure you get to this is important. That's why I'm maxing out on it. The 1 copy of Madam Spider should be self-explanatory. Being able to search your trap cards is important, as your trap cards are one of your main interruptions, and so we're playing the 1 copy to search. I won't play too many just because if you play too many, you could clog your hand, and it doesn't really do much for you outside of searching the trap card. If you were to play more copies of Punk names, you'd just bump up Sherkusai instead. So hopefully that makes sense. Just remember that if you have any comments on my ratios and you want clarification on any of my reasonings, you can always comment down below, like and subscribe too. So for the hand traps now, we're playing 3 DD Crow, 3 Ghost Spell, and 3 Ash Blossom. We're also playing Imperm, but again, remember I said that we'll go over that in these spells and traps. To discuss my choice of hand traps, DD Crow and Ghost Spell are amazing in this format. If you are playing a hand trap heavy deck, I would not be playing, to rephrase, I would be playing these at max copies, because these are definitely 2 of the best hand traps this format. Just being able to stop tier in its tracks, or not usually in its tracks, but being able to hit a lot of their core cards. This also hits a lot of the Sprite cards as well, if Sprite remains relevant. And then it also hits some of the upcoming decks that are sort of bringing themselves back to life. For example, Despia being able to hit Brennan in red, and also some of the fusion monster effects. So definitely play these at max copies if you're playing a hand trap build like the way I am. If you're playing a different version, you could consider putting these down in terms of ratios, or maybe putting them to the side, but I definitely think these are the strongest hand traps this format. Ash Blossom remains a good blanket card. I know it isn't the greatest against tier. It also isn't like the most paramount card in preventing other top tier decks plays. Nonetheless, I do think it does put a wrench in some of those plans for those top tier decks. Also, it is a great card against rogues, so I keep it in here for now. Hopefully this makes sense. This is my main deck, and we're going to move to the spells and traps. So, spells and traps. This should be very familiar, mainly because my spells and traps really haven't changed since my last list and last format, outside of Imperm. So, we're playing 3 copies of Emergency Teleport, 3 copies of Punk Sham Extreme Session, 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, 1 copy of Nashiwari Surprise, and then 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. So, E-Tele, very self-explanatory, being an extender for your deck. No reason to play less than 3, honestly. So yep, that's that. The field spell, this is of course the crux of the deck, as I mentioned during my main deck section of Punk right now as a pure variant. Basically just being able to get this card on the field as soon as possible, getting as many draws as possible both during your turn and your opponent's turn. Remember that you can always share Kusai during your opponent's turn to get an additional draw, is again the main way I think you'll be able to compete with decks in the current format. So maximize these copies. I'm considering maybe playing Terraforming 2 on top of these 3 copies and the 3 Wagon, just because the field spell is so important. Though, as I mentioned at the start of the video, this is a preliminary build I have, so not entirely sure if Terraforming will go in towards the end. Cosmic Cyclone, 3 copies. This is mainly to counter Mine. With Mine not being banned, I think a lot of players are moving back towards it, no longer fearing it being hit. So having this in here as a guaranteed out to that card so that you don't get blown out whenever you face those variants is nice. So 3 copies of Cosmic there. The 1 Nashiwari Surprise, this is our main target for Madam Spider. I'm not playing Gabu at the moment, though I might put it back in. The only reason why I'm playing Nashiwari Surprise over Gabu is because I believe it is the stronger card versus Gabu. I know Nashiwari Surprise doesn't hit tier too well in most spots, since a lot of them float, but it does hit a lot of the other decks great, just being a regular key break as it is. I might actually consider bumping this up to 2 or 3 copies, and then again might bring in Gabu as well, so we'll have to see how that changes, but for now just 1. Finally, the 3 copies of Imperm. You might notice, compared to my last list, I am no longer playing Gamma, and that is because Gamma is very poor into tier, so I opted for Imperm instead, as it can still hit tier pretty strongly, being able to hit Kit, being able to hit, let's say, really any of their names that they summon to field, since all of them do stuff when summoned. Also being able to hit Sprite, all the names, and then whatever else is in the format, because most decks that are rising up to the sort of batting position are vulnerable to imperms at certain points. So that is why we have 3 of these. Again, being the preliminary build that it is, I might consider changing this, though for now it seems pretty solid, so that's that. So this concludes the spells and traps, and then we're going to go to the extra deck. I want to admit that my extra deck is a big work in progress. That's mainly because Halq made things admittedly a lot easier to build around. You know, you just have your Halq, your Formula Synchron, and then whatever level 10 monsters you need. But now without Halq, I'm trying to figure out what I need to put in my extra deck to maximize our sort of end board to stop the opponent and or lock them out of killing you and or making further plays. So for now, I have gone back to the Fortune Tune plus Breaksword plus Zeus combination. This was just easy for me to think about, so I threw it in for now. And I do like the fact that, you know, this can bait out certain interruptions and or clear boards that you might not be able to clear without them. For example, maybe there's a trap deck that for some reason can't interact with these. You just go into Zeus, get rid of their stuff, and you don't have to worry about anything else. So, and then of course, Breaksword is a nice way to sometimes bait out interruptions if you have a pretty nice hand before you extend with that hand into your usual place. So this isn't here for now, might change it, but I've always been fond of this engine, so keeping it in there. For Link monsters, we're playing 1 Dark, 1 Almirage, 1 Unicorn, and 1 Access Code Talker. Dark, Great Link 2 helps you climb into Unicorn, which can then climb into Access Code Talker. I know there is the issue of not having as many attributes for Access Code Talker, so I'm going to have to fix that. But for now, this is fine as it is, I believe. Unicorn and Access Code Talker should make sense, you know. Unicorn's a great spin, and then Access Code is Access Code, just being able to go for game and or pressure your opponent so hard that they sometimes scoop. That's always great. Almirage is in here for the Wagon play that I alluded to during the main deck monster section. Essentially, Wagon being less than 1,000 attack, you can always normal summon it, search a field spell, go into Almirage, banish Wagon from grave to summon it off of the field spell and continue your plays. I like the theory behind it. I'm not sure how well it is or how good it is in execution quite yet, but for now it's there. Our 1 fusion monster is Rising Carp. Should make sense to you, just being a potential combo line through Shirakusai. No reason to play 0 copies unless you're not playing Shirakusai, so we're playing 1. And I'm not playing 2 for the reason that, as you had seen, I'm only playing 1 Shirakusai. Now we get to the interesting part, and that is the Synchro monsters. We're playing 2 copies of Dragon Drive, 1 copy of Scarlight, 2 copies of Psychic and Punisher. One of them is a proxy because I have not received it yet in the mail, but I will soon. And then finally 2 copies of Amazing Dragon. You're probably looking at this extra deck wondering, well, Toon World, where are all the negates? And I have to be honest, it's kind of hard to make negates as of right now without some really fancy text in Pure P.U.N.K. That is why instead of making negates, I have opted to turbo out Psychic and Punisher. Reason why is one of the benefits, I know I keep going back to tier, but again, I believe it is going to be the strongest deck in the format. But the one thing about tier that made it good was that you would have the biggest monsters on field that were hard to deal with. However, playing as a P.U.N.K deck, you have access to Psychic and Punisher, which is not only bigger than most of the tier monsters, but it is also unaffected by all their effects. So being able to turbo out, say, 1 or 2 of these first turn, it makes it really hard for tier to get over them, even if they can still make their plays and aren't getting interrupted by our previous board of like Calamity, Bear, and Chenging. The 2 Dragon Drive, I do think 2 is the correct ratio, maybe 3, but definitely not 1. You want to have 1 for your first turn, 2 for the follow-up, and it's always a nice card, you know, searching your names, also being able to trigger a field spell, and then the rare occasions where it summons itself back whenever your opponent responds to your P.U.N.K monster effects. Amazing Dragon at 2 also should make sense. I'm playing 2 mainly because there are times where you use 1 copy for your turn 1 combo, whether it be summoning back monsters to continue your play, and or summoning it during your opponent's turn to make or to spin cards back with Shirakusai. So that's where the second copy comes in as your follow-up play for subsequent turns. So 2, 2, 2. I think that will be what I stick for now, but we'll have to see. The one oddball here is Scarlight. I'm not sure yet what other rank or level 8 synchro monster I want to put in. I have Scarlight here for time rules, though I might end up changing this to say Omega as an additional alternative interruption, and or Savage Dragon in the case that I have Link's Engrave, and of course it is another negate. So this out of the way, this is my current main deck. And as I mentioned, I do not have a side deck prepared for you quite now, but we're going to go to the concluding remarks now, and I'll briefly talk about my thoughts on what we could put in. I'm sure that a lot of you playing this deck right now do feel like this deck is a lot weaker, and unfortunately I would have to agree with you. It does feel like it's lost a lot of its sort of hue from the previous format. Halq was definitely a big facilitator of a lot of the combos that we had, and even without Halq, Chaos Ruler would have been nice to keep for some really wacky, you know, advantage gain combos, as well as just being an additional body to make ranked 8s. Nonetheless, I do believe this deck still has merit in the current format. Again, the field spell is a very broken card, so being able to have access to it, to get to it consistently, and abusing it to draw into whatever you need to stop your opponent is definitely a plus that keeps this deck somewhat relevant moving forward. On the topic of relevancy though, will this deck, you know, still be top in the like meta relevancy sort of spectrum? Will it still be high rogue? I can't say for sure yet. Again, I keep mentioning this throughout the video, but this is a very preliminary build I'm sharing with you now just so that I have it out there. I have not tested enough to know if this will be like 100% like good, strong, viable competitor versus what we would still have to deal with being tier, getting new support in Darkwing Blast at the end of this month. Sprite also getting its new support to remedy the loss of Ronin Toad, and so we'll have to see how that pans out. Regardless, I do think it's still a very fun deck to play if you're a Punk enthusiast like me, so I definitely would suggest, you know, you keep tinkering around with the archetype. Maybe you'll find something that works better than what I have here, and then you can use that to carry you through any events you go to. Just to briefly bring up the side deck, since I did promise to talk about that. As of right now, I definitely think Dimensional Barrier is a great side deck option, being able to hit tier, also being able to hit Branded Despia if it does show up, and then you can hit some other rogue decks that are out there that might abuse something that is not fusion. Nibiru is also great. It still hits tier, it hits Sprite, hits a lot of rogue decks, so I'd keep that in maybe. Dark Ruler is also nice, being able to, you know, of course, as Dark Ruler does, completely negate your opponent's board. Great option. I'm considering maybe putting TCG in because it does sort of mess up, you know, a lot of decks. We'll have to see. And then outside of that, I guess you could always try Anti-Spell, any other hard traps like, I guess, DDG if you wanted to, since the field spell can always draw into those. Otherwise, do whatever you feel, whatever feels right for wherever you're playing, and or whatever you feel like is the most threatening options to your version of Pure Punk as you play in events. That said, that's all I have to say, so thank you so much for watching. Hopefully all of you aren't feeling too sad after these Banlist hits that we received. Don't worry, we'll work together to find the correct build. Remember to like and subscribe. I do appreciate it. You know, we're on the way to 1K subscribers, and I would love to hit that mark, by which I would have to figure out what I would do for all of you as a reward. Nonetheless, once we get there, I'll do that. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day, enjoy the rest of the week, have fun playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and I will see you next time.